It is one of the most compelling scenes in all of the Bible. Certainly one of the most compelling scenes in the life of Jesus. Jesus leaves the Mount of Olives, comes into Jerusalem, goes to the temple courts, and begins to teach. And as always, when he taught, there is a large crowd of people who gather around him. And while he's teaching, some of the Pharisees and religious authorities bring before him and thrust into his midst before the crowd a woman who has been caught in the act of adultery. And they say to him, "Teacher, the law of Moses demands that we condemn such women. What do you say?" And as John reminds us, they bring the woman before Jesus in order to trap Jesus. You see, if Jesus says, "Yes, stone her," then he's betrayed the very teaching on compassion and forgiveness that so many have heard. If he says, "No, don't stone her," then he betrays the law of Moses, the law and tradition of the Hebrew people, and sets himself up for condemnation. It's a no-win situation. If he says yes, he betrays his teaching. If he says no, he betrays his heritage. Initially, Jesus says nothing. John says that he stooped down and he wrote in the dirt with his finger. And then he stood up, looked at the religious authorities, looked at the crowd, and said, "Okay, the one of you without sin, go ahead and cast a stone." Wrote in the dirt with his finger. Stands up and says, "Okay, the one of you without sin, cast the stone. Go ahead." Stoops back down and writes again in the sand. The text says that one by one, the older ones first, they left the scene. And we find Jesus with a woman. And Jesus says, "Where are they? Has no one condemned you, woman?" "No one, sir." "Then neither do I condemn you. Now go and leave your life of sin." It is one of the grand stories of the Bible. And there is much for us to learn here. So let's look at some insights. First of all, Jesus does not categorically dismiss the Pharisees. This is very important. Jesus does not categorically dismiss the Pharisees. The Pharisees in Jesus' day and time might be called the gatekeepers of spirituality and morality. The Pharisees in that time were the gatekeepers of spirituality and morality. They were the ones who made sure that everyone knew, understood, and obeyed the law and the tradition. They were the ones who monitored the morality of the people of God. One could go so far as to say that they were the ones who were battling a kind of laissez-faire morality. A laissez-faire morality says, I just decide for myself what it is I want to do. I get to choose my morality. I get to choose my moral code and my spiritual code. I don't depend on some tradition. I don't depend on some heritage. I don't depend on some faith that has been established and passed down to me. I get to choose for myself what it is I believe and what it is I do. That is laissez-faire morality. We have a problem in our culture with laissez-faire morality. The idea, the mindset that I can choose for myself what it is I believe and what it is I do without any linkage whatsoever to some established moral code or some religious tradition. Many of you know the name Ted Koppel. Ted Koppel for 25 years was the host of the noted news show Nightline. He's now a senior news analyst for NPR and for BBC World News. He was asked some years ago to speak at Duke University's commencement, and he said in that speech this: "We have convinced ourselves that slogans will save us. Shoot up if you must, but use a clean needle. Sleep with whomever you choose, just do it safely. Lie to your spouse, cheat on your taxes, just don't get caught." The answer is no. 1,000 times no. Not because it isn't cool or smart or because you might end up in jail or dead, but because it's wrong. We have spent 5,000 years as a race of rational creatures trying to drag ourselves out of the primeval slime by searching for truth and morality. And in its purest form, truth is not a polite tap on the shoulder. It is a howling reproach. What Moses brought down from Mount Sinai were not 10 suggestions. They were 10 commandments. There is a place for those who remind you and me that we have a foundation from which we make our spiritual and moral choices. There have to be people who hold us accountable. And the Pharisees, in their most noble and finest moments, were that. They were the ones who held everyone accountable from a laissez-faire morality. Most of you know the name Will Willimon. He's one of our retired bishops. I've mentioned him often. He's now a professor at Duke University. And he says that every time he left the house, went out with friends, went to a party, wherever he went, his mother would say this to him: Will, don't forget who you are. Don't forget who you are. In their finest moments, the Pharisees were those who would say to the people of God, don't forget who you are, and don't forget whose you are. Second thing, Jesus himself had high expectations. Jesus himself had high standards that he asked you and I to follow. We've all heard the phrase, the hard sayings of Jesus, or the difficult sayings of Jesus. Some have spoken of the impossible ethic of Jesus, meaning that the teachings of Jesus, if you look at them closely, are simply too hard to fulfill. You know, love your neighbor. Pray for those who persecute you. Give of your own resources to help the poor. Forgive not just once, but again and again and again. Give yourselves totally to loving God and loving others. Avoid letting money become a priority in your life. Seek to be at peace with everyone, not just those you like. Now think about it. Really love everybody? Really be at peace as best I can with everybody? Really forgive again and again and again and again? Really give of what I got to help somebody else? Really love the person I simply cannot stand? Yes. To follow Jesus is to accept that there is a standard. There is a calling. There is a high expectation that is inherent in our commitment to him. It cannot be ignored. If you read the Gospels and you look in on this Holy Week, you will find Jesus saying this: whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. His cross, his teachings, his way, I'm to follow. I've mentioned before Andy Stanley and his wonderful book, Christian, It's Not What You Think, and I believe some of our Sunday school classes have studied it. He says this: when you're a real follower of Jesus, you quit searching for loopholes. You understand your job is to say yes to whatever he asks. Disciples of Jesus do not look for loopholes. Each day, in every aspect of their life, they ask, what does the Lord require of me? There are standards. There are expectations. There are those who rightly ask of you and me, do you remember who you are and whose you are? But no one has been given the privilege to condemn anyone else. Jesus does not give you and me the privilege of condemning anyone. You wonder what he wrote in the dirt? Scholars have debated this for centuries, and there are all kinds of opinions. I will tell you what I think. I think when Jesus went and knelt down and wrote with his finger, he wrote things like greed, pride, gossip, hostility, intolerance, insensitivity, unforgiving, unloving. Wonder why when he stood up and said, those without sin cast the first stone, and everybody leaves? Because that was their sin. Greed, gossip, hostility, intolerance, insensitivity, unloving, unforgiving. Their sins and our sins. Go ahead. Never been greedy? Hey, throw the stone. Never felt wrongful pride? Throw it. Never gossiped? Grab a big stone. Never been hostile? Never had unchecked anger? Never been unloving? Never been unforgiving? Throw the stone. You and I are allowed to throw stones if we can say that what Jesus wrote in the ground that day does not apply to us. But it does apply to us. Because he wrote my name that day in the dust. And he wrote your name that day in the dust. And when he wrote my name and he wrote your name, he sent a message that is riveted throughout the ages. And that message is, yes, there are standards. Yes, there is a way of life to follow. Yes, there are high expectations. But none of us are given the privilege, none of us, to indict anyone else. None of us. Because, again, we're all sinners. He said in another place, he said, judge not that you be not judged, for the measure you judge, you will be judged to. That's pretty harsh, but true. Fourth thing, what does he tell her? Neither do I condemn you. You know what we call that? We call it God's forgiveness given to us when we can accept that we're not who we are meant to be and need to be. And I have to tell you that Jesus would never have spoken those words to that woman if he didn't know that she felt sorrowful for what she had done. He would not have said, neither do I condemn you, if he didn't feel that in her heart she knew that she had betrayed who she was meant to be. But he did say it. It's grace. And there is nobody, no human being, Lisa said it wonderfully in her time with the children, there is no such thing as a human being who is beyond the touch of God's grace and God's love. Ever. I don't care who you are or what you've done, as I've said so many times, none of us are beyond the touch of God's grace and the promise of his forgiveness. I don't know if you like U2 or not. Bono and the band. I love them. And one of their songs I most appreciate is called Grace, and it has these words. Grace, she takes the blame, she covers the shame, removes the stain. It could be her name. Grace finds goodness in everything. What once was hurt, what once was friction, what left a mark no longer stings. Because grace makes beauty out of ugly things. Grace finds beauty in everything. I love that. What does grace do with your life and mine? It makes beauty out of ugliness in our lives. It makes goodness out of everything. Not because we deserve it, not because we warrant it, because God loves us. Woman, where are they who would condemn you? You're not here. Neither do I condemn you. Receive the grace that transforms ugliness into beauty and that transforms our lives in spite of ourselves into goodness. Take it. It's a gift. But notice how the story ends, and this is the final thing. Grace does not allow us to stay where we are. Because what does he tell her right after he says, then neither do I condemn you? Does the story end? No. What does he say? Go and leave your life of sin. Grace does not free you and me from God's expectation that we will grow and develop and mature and do better. If you want to put what he said in colloquial words, he was saying, woman, do better. Try harder. Be more faithful. Press on. With God's help, become the person you're meant to be. Grace is God's gift. Our changed life is our gift to him in response to that grace. So the Pharisees brought the woman, right into the middle of the crowd, thrust her there, caught in the act of adultery. Not speculation, caught in the act of adultery. What are you going to do? No win. Right in the dirt. Those without sin, cast the stone. I don't condemn you, but go and live your life of sin. Thanks be to God for those like the Pharisees who in their noble moments remind us there is a way to live. Thanks be to God that you and I, in our more faithful moments, understand Jesus is serious about following him and obeying him. But thanks be to God, there is grace. Wonderful, everlasting, life-changing grace that empowers us to step up and do better next time. So that like the woman, we can go and sin no more. Thanks be to God. Amen. Would you stand for our affirmation song?